My name is Lori Langer de Ramirez, and I am the director of the World and Classical Language Department at the Dalton School in New York City. I am also a teacher of middle school Spanish, and I'm happy to be here to share with you today some of my thoughts around teaching culture to novice students. So to help illustrate, we have some images to share with you. Let's get started. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about culture, and we're calling this Culture on the Path to Proficiency, Hiding in Plain Sight. The culture is everywhere, and it's just a matter of how you can bring it into the classroom and get at those products, practices, and perspectives in a way that all learners can appreciate them, including our novice students. So let's talk a little bit about what this looks like. So as you all know, we've got the 3 P's of culture: products, practices, and perspectives. So products are those objects of a culture that are tangible. This might be objects from the culture, crafts from the culture, games, but it also includes things like literature and music. These are all things that reflect the what of culture, right? Then we have practices. So what things are done and where. And so these are things like greetings, time constraints, whether it's good to arrive early or late, how we greet each other, how we celebrate. So these are what I would call the how of culture. But for many years, we really focused on those 2 bits of culture in the world language classroom, the products and the practices, without really getting to the perspectives. And the perspectives are really where it's at. So if you notice in our standards, it's always a combination of perspectives plus one of the other P's. So it's products as they relate to the perspectives of a culture, or practices as they relate to the perspectives of the culture. And the perspectives really are the why. So why do we have these things in our culture? Why do we do these things in our culture? And so we'll talk a little bit about what this looks like for novices, because one of the major challenges in working with novices in teaching culture is to get to that why place. So I wanted to share some ideas for what you might do in a novice classroom to bring in culture in ways that you wouldn't necessarily think, in ways that might be not part of your main lesson, but incorporated throughout your teaching techniques. So one of those, I'm a huge fan of using mascots in the classroom, especially with younger kids, with less students. They love having a class mascot. And so your class mascot could and should reflect a cultural element that, that might be compelling to students. Young kids love animals, but then middle school kids like them as well. So here we have a selection of ones that I've used in the past. The ajolote from Mexico is adorable and kids love them. And we actually had some live ones in our school one year, so that was great. The coqui from Puerto Rico. I had a wonderful stuffed animal a while back that had the sound of the cookie, so that's really fun. This shows you how old I am during the Barcelona Olympics. This is way, way back, or actually after the Olympics. But if you remember, Kobe was the mascot for the Barcelona Olympics, and kids thought he was really fun. Down on the bottom right, you have Chimoc, and he is a perro calato. So he's a hairless dog from Peru. And there's a whole series of comics around Chimoc and his friends, and those are really, really fun. So you have a whole plethora of mascot possibilities there. I love this little quetzal from Guatemala. He's a wonderful mascot. And then one of my personal favorites is the capybara, who is from numerous countries in South America. So you can take your pick if you're focusing on a particular country 1 year or 1 month. The capybara is quite versatile. So bring these characters, these mascots, this bit of culture. In this case, it's also connected to the ecosystem of a place sometimes. So you can either go with the real mascot or with a character mascot, but that's a great way of bringing culture in to the classroom for the younger ones and for your novice students. Using picture books that go through the alphabet almost always share something cultural, right? If you look at a a picture book or an alphabet book in English, some of those objects might be generic, but many of them will have a cultural connotation. So you see two here, which I thought were wonderful. The one on the top left is a book for learning English in India. And so you see Rama and Saraswati as two of their letter representatives. And so you could really share that with students. You can explain a little bit about who these people are, or these gods in this case, and give them a little taste of that culture coming through the imagery there. On the bottom, you have an alphabet book in Thai. The one on the left, I believe, is Yor Yak. My Thai is really rusty, but he is a sort of a guard figure. And on the right is Roa Rua, and that is a canoe. And that's very, very typical of Bangkok and the canals. And so you get a lot of cultural information from this sort of material with students. So you can really bring it in there rather than doing kind of the traditional A's for apple, B's for boat. Every week, I have a PowerPoint presentation for my students ready to go for the whole week so that they have their whole lesson available to them. And just as my title page, I don't really dive too deep into this particular page, but it is my intro page. And at least once a quarter, I change the craft that I use. So for the whole first part of the year, we looked at papel picado. So every week, there was a different image of papel picado. This one, of course, I used during the time of the Day of the Dead. So at the beginning of the quarter, we talk a little bit about the craft, and so this is a cultural product. We talk about the practice of making this craft, and I show a very quick video about how papel picado is made. Kids are pretty fascinated. And then we talk a little bit about the perspective around papel picado. So why is this widely used? When is it used? What do the colors represent? What type of celebrations is it used for? So it's a great way to bring in just a little hint of culture. We don't dive too deeply after that, but every week we have a different image to look at. And it's a great way of getting culture in very quickly at the beginning of your lessons. This is our most recent beginning PowerPoint slide. We've moved from papel picado to molas. Molas are a traditional craft from Panama and Colombia. This one is a cultural product. The practice of making molas has a very, very interesting history that has to do with the conquest and indigenous rights. So we do talk a little bit about that in very simple language. And then they might read. Now, my students, this is an 8th grade class, so they can go a little bit deeper and read a little bit more about the history of molas. But again, what starts out as a very, very simple introduction to every week and an image can generate deeper conversations later on. But it doesn't have to be a daily thing. It's something that we can lay in at a certain time and then come back to later on. Gestures are a fantastic way of getting students to do cultural activities, to make cultural connections. We're remote right now, as I'm sure many of you are, but when we are in person, we might greet a certain way. We would start the year learning about what an appropriate gesture or greeting might look like. And that's a really great way to get kids to feel connected to the culture and also to be able to use gestures appropriately when they're speaking with native speakers. I love this image. So this is from a school in Dhaka in Bangladesh. And so the picture on the right is an image from a teacher's classroom. She is a Bangla teacher. And so she has images of, she has books that represent cultural folks, myths and legends. But on the left is a box that lives outside the library. With a wonderful craft style on it that has some cultural connotations. And so not only is the classroom a great place to have cultural products represented, but the school as well. So anytime you can kind of give materials or help the school have bulletin boards or displays elsewhere, it's really helpful for your language. When telling stories, images in stories always have cultural meaning. In this case, it's a wonderful mix of drawn images and photographs. So I love the way the picture books on the left, these are for Mandarin language, have images of that were photographs from China, and the fictional character is overlaid on top. So you get a geographic kind of background, you get lots of information about the place along with the story. So it's a great, great technique. The one on the right is one that I made, is a photograph taken in Mexico, and the characters are kind of cut and paste, literally over the top of the photograph. But this is a great way of bringing that cultural knowledge, in this case, that geographical knowledge, into your storytelling. So photographs are really where it's at with regard to bringing culture in. We're not able necessarily to travel with our kids, but bringing these images into the classroom are really helpful. The images you see here are from a fantastic collection of photographs by Peter Menzel called Material World. He was able to get folks to bring all of their worldly possessions out up onto the roof or the front lawn of their home. I use these images for teaching parts of the house, sometimes family members, objects in the house, furniture. You can see all of that in these two images. And what's great about this is that we may not dig into the cultural component of this image at all. It may just be in the background, and we're just talking about the family. But it's a family, in the case of the top left, it's a family from Mali. So if you're a French teacher, just having that image alongside a family from maybe France and a family from Haiti allows you to bring cultural components in. It might be that you use this image just to teach the family members and the rooms of the house, and that you get to the cultural components, or you dig deeper into the photo later on when you spiral back to it. But it's a wonderful way of bringing that culture in a way that your novice students can comprehend. Here's some more images from Peter Menzel. This is a different series called What the World Eats. Lots of wonderful vocabulary here you can probably see. You can talk about food, you can talk about meal taking. Again, you can review families here. Great for comparing and contrasting. But you have cultural images that give a lot more information than just reviewing food and family. And then the last of this series I'll share with you is one that I think is really lovely, and it's kids and their favorite toys. So again, great vocabulary, lots of material to talk about here, but also you get to see culturally what kids play with in different parts of the world. I collect photos from around the world. This photograph is one of my treasures. I took this photo in Bogota, in Colombia. And this is something that I might use as a do now activity. So I might project this at the front of the room and have my students give their opinion. What is this? What does it mean? What is it, who is it for? Obviously, this will open up a conversation around body image and body size. This, for those of you who don't speak Spanish, is we would call a big person's store. But the great line is prendas de vestir para gorditos. So clothing for chubby people. That's likely to cause a lot of reaction in your classroom, and students will certainly have something to say about it. It's a wonderful way of unpacking how different cultures view body and body size and body shapes. And so it's a great beginning to a longer conversation. Whenever I'm talking about relationships, families, I'm always very, very conscious of using different images. So just be looking out for these images. The ones on the left represent different types of love and different types of relationships, perfect for Valentine's Day and for talking about family structures. The one on the right, I just recently found. And so I always, when I find a good image, I have a folder on my desktop that I take these images, always, keep them for later use. This one I think is particularly beautiful. Again, you might use the image on the right or the ones on the left as the beginning of a conversation around culture that is overt, where you're looking at the cultural practice perhaps and getting to the perspective. Or you might use these as background for a conversation around love and family. Not all of these cultural images need to be unpacked at the moment, but it is important that kids recognize the diversity of relationships and love and images, and that you're constantly exposing them to different sites so that later on you can kind of unpack them and get to those all important perspectives. This is a slide from Pear Deck. If you haven't tried it yet, it's a wonderful tool for teaching, especially in these remote times. And this is actually a template. This is a slide that comes preloaded. And so, yay, we love when a lot of work is already done for us. But there's nothing really cultural here. And so one of the things I recommend when you find good materials is to see what cultural bits you can put in there while keeping the activity as you would like it. So this is obviously an activity about clothing and about colors. So this is the original slide. This is how I changed it. These are images from the Festival del Cuy, where folks dress up their cuy, their guinea pigs, and they get prizes. So it's a little bit like a beauty contest. But these are fantastic photos, and we can do basically the same work, looking at colors, looking at clothing, just with something a little bit more cultural. And I would say probably a lot more fun. Another example, matching, this is glossing from English to, or from Spanish to English. Never really a great activity. You want to keep them out of English if possible. This is how I changed that one. Coming back to my beloved molas, there's really, so many colors that you can do the same thing just with a cultural product as fodder for that vocab practice. I love to collect memes. I have a huge collection on Pinterest. You can go on Pinterest. There's tons of folks who are collecting and sharing really great materials. This one I thought was fantastic. And I use this as a do now activity, beginning reading at the start of class. And so students had to read through here and decide which alebrije they saw themselves as. So it's a great interpretive reading activity. And it also kind of gets at that cultural product of the alebrije. They later on will go through the practice of making an alebrije and what it means for the culture. So great way to start that, very simple interpretive reading activity for kids. We also have an interpersonal speaking activity where they discuss with each other which ones they chose. Another good example, this was some of your goals for the new year. We just passed through the new year. So as you may know, in Spain, the tradition is to eat, to put 12 grapes in your mouth. So the reference here, the kids didn't know who the little green guys were until I told them they were grapes. And then we talked a little bit about that cultural practice, right? And so again, it's a great interpretive reading activity, great for having a good conversation with your classmate afterwards about which ones you've chosen. And then you can get to the perspective of this tradition in Spain at the start of the new year. More memes, this is actually an infographic. And what I like about this one in particular is that it overtly compares tastes and foods in Mexico to kind of a foreign taste. So, what do foreigners find strange about Mexican food? And I like that kind of putting it right out there for kids to talk about. And then you can bring that back to them and say, what are some American tastes that folks not from the United States find odd and find different? So it's a great source of culture for them to start doing that cultural comparison. This one is great because we talk a little bit about the close talker, right, about personal space. This is about proxemics. And what's great is that it compares not 2 cultures, but 3. So Latin culture, writ large, I guess, through up against the United States and then Japan. So how close is okay to talk? And that's it's a very, very simple interpretive reading material, but great for conversation after. And then very lastly, I'll share with you a project that we've been working on. I worked on this one last year with my 6th graders, and this was a virtual trip to the Gold Museum in Bogota. And because we were home, we were remote, I decided I wanted to send them cards with a pass. So if you'll notice, the pass on the right is a postcard from the museum, about 3 different groups. Each kid got a different image, and those images then led later on to the group that they were going to be a part of. So having little objects that you share with students that they can read and look at, and that you may not dig too deeply into, but it's the start of a bigger project, a bigger activity, can be really fun. We visited the museum virtually. I gave them some money. They got to order some food. We looked, as is another Pear Deck slide, we looked at currency and some of the famous people listed on the currency. Again, very simple matching activity, but a great way to get at kind of famous members of a particular community. We traveled, we packed our luggage, we visited the museum and the artifacts, and then we took part in a robbery, a mystery that they got to do virtually online. So these are just some quick examples of ways that you might incorporate culture into your classes. I think there are so many more ways. Some of them go deep and some of them are just at the surface with the intention of getting deeper later on. But don't shy away from bringing culture into the classroom for novice students. There are so many different ways to do it, and also lots of ways to have fun with it. So with that, I hope that that was enjoyable, and I wish you all a great year of teaching. Thanks.